Admiral Vexthan stood before the massive display screen in his private chambers. The blue light from the holographic images made his gray scales shine like wet stone. He was reading reports about a new species. They called themselves humans. The reports made him laugh. These humans had only discovered faster than light travel about 80 years ago. They were bobbies in the galaxy. Their ships used chemical rockets and nuclear engines. They had no energy shields. Their weapons were metal slugs fired from magnetic rails. They were primitives playing with toys while the Dominion ruled 1,000 star systems. Vexthan had commanded fleets for over 200 years. He had crushed rebellions on dozens of worlds. He had burned cities and broken armies. The Dominion High Command trusted him with their most important missions, and now they had given him the simplest task of his career. The humans had refused to leave a mining system. The system was rich in rare metals. The Dominion wanted it. The humans said no. Nobody said no to the Dominion. Vexthan called his senior officers to the war room. They gathered around the central table as he activated the tactical display. A star map appeared, showing the disputed system. 12 small dots represented the human defense fleet. "These are our enemies," Vexthan said. His voice was deep and calm. 12 vessels. The largest is perhaps half the size of our standard cruiser. They have no shields. Their armor is simple metal alloy. Their weapons cannot penetrate our defenses. His tactical officer, a young female named Kethra, studied the data. "Admiral, my calculations show we can destroy their entire fleet in 90 seconds, perhaps less." "I agree," Vexthan said, "but High Command wants us to be thorough. We will take 40 ships. We will leave nothing behind. The other primitive species watching must understand what happens when you challenge the Dominion." The officers nodded. Some of them looked bored. This was not a battle. This was an execution. Over the next 3 days, Vexthan assembled his fleet. 40 warships gathered at the staging point. There were heavy cruisers with plasma cannons that could melt through mountains. There were fast destroyers with torpedo bays full of antimatter warheads. There were support ships carrying thousands of soldiers for ground assault. It was more force than necessary. Vexthan knew this, but he wanted to send a message. On the morning of the attack, he stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The ship was massive. It had served the Empire for 300 years. Its weapons had killed millions. Its name made enemies surrender without fighting. "All ships report ready," his communications officer announced. Vexthan looked at the star map one last time. The human colony was a small world with only 2 million people. Their fleet was waiting in orbit. They knew the Dominion was coming. They had chosen to stay and fight instead of running. Vexthan found this amusing. The humans were brave, stupid but brave. "Begin the jump," he ordered. The fleet entered faster than light travel. The stars stretched into lines of light. Space itself seemed to bend around them. Vexthan felt the familiar vibration of the drives working. In moments, they would arrive at the human system. He thought about what would happen next. The humans would see his fleet appear. They would have perhaps 30 seconds to understand their doom. Then the plasma cannons would fire. The human ships would burn. The colony below would watch their defenders die. And then Vexthan would give them a choice: surrender or join their fleet in death. Most species chose surrender, the smart ones anyway. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of faster than light travel. The display screen flickered and then showed the human system. There was the planet, blue and green like a jewel. There was the mining station on the largest moon. And there, forming a defensive line between the Dominion fleet and the colony, were the human ships. Vexthan studied them carefully. They were ugly vessels, blocky and angular, without the smooth curves of Dominion design. Their hulls were covered with what looked like additional armor plates, bolted on without elegance. Small turrets dotted their surfaces. Sensor arrays stuck out at odd angles. They looked like ships built by children. "Admiral," Kethra said, "the humans are not moving, they are holding position." "They know they cannot run," Vexthan replied. "They have chosen to die with honor. I can respect that, even if I cannot understand it." He walked to the center of the bridge and stood tall. This was the moment he had performed countless times, the moment before victory, the moment when inferior species learned their place in the galaxy. "All ships," he announced, "target the human fleet. Fire on my command." The tactical display showed 40 Dominion warships locking their weapons on 12 human vessels. The power readings climbed as plasma cannons charged. The numbers were overwhelming. The math was simple. The humans had no chance. Vexthan allowed himself a small smile. This would be over quickly. He would be home in time for the festival season. His family would celebrate another easy victory. The Dominion would grow stronger, and the humans would become a footnote in history. "Fire," he said. Space lit up with blue-white plasma. 40 ships unleashed their weapons at once. Hundreds of energy bolts crossed the void between the fleets. The display showed the impacts coming in 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. The plasma hit the human ships. Explosions bloomed across their hulls. Armor plates vaporized. Atmosphere vented into space. The human vessels staggered under the assault. Vexthan watched the display, waiting for the human signatures to disappear. He waited and waited. The signatures remained. "Kethra," he said slowly, "report." His tactical officer stared at her console. Her scales had turned pale. Her hands were shaking. "Admiral," she whispered, "the human ships are still there. They are damaged, but they are still there." Vexthan felt something cold move through his body. It was a feeling he had not experienced in a very long time. It was doubt. "That is impossible," he said. But the display did not lie. 12 human ships, burning and wounded, continued to hold their line, and as Vexthan watched, they began to move. They were coming toward his fleet. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion fell silent. Every officer stared at the tactical display. Every mind struggled to understand what they were seeing. The human ships were still alive. Admiral Vexthan gripped the railing in front of him. His claws dug into the metal. This made no sense. His fleet had just delivered enough firepower to crack a small moon. The human vessels should be expanding clouds of gas and debris. Instead, they were accelerating toward his fleet. "Damage assessment," Vexthan demanded. His voice was harder now. The easy confidence was gone. Kethra worked her console with trembling hands. "The human ships have taken severe damage, Admiral. Multiple hull breaches, atmosphere venting from several vessels, power fluctuations across their fleet." She paused. "But their engines are still working. Their weapons are still online." "How?" another officer asked. "They have no shields. Our plasma should have burned through their hulls like paper." Vexthan watched the human ships grow larger on the display. They moved in a strange formation. The most damaged vessels were in the center. The stronger ones protected them on the sides. They were covering each other. "Fire again," Vexthan ordered. "All ships, second volley." The Dominion fleet unleashed another wave of plasma. The blue-white bolts crossed the void and struck the human vessels. More explosions. More armor plates flying into space. One human ship lost an entire section of its hull. Bodies tumbled out into the vacuum. The ship kept coming. Vexthan felt the cold feeling in his chest grow stronger. These humans were insane. Their ships were dying around them. Their crews were being killed. And still they advanced. "Third volley," he said. "Target their engines, stop their movement." The fleet fired again. This time they aimed for the human propulsion systems. Several hits landed true. One human destroyer lost all power and began to drift. Another was spinning slowly, its engines destroyed on one side. But the remaining ships adjusted their formation. They used their own bodies to shield the crippled vessels. They kept coming. And then the humans fired back. Vex then had read the reports about human weapons, kinetic projectiles, metal slugs accelerated by magnetic fields, primitive technology that the Dominion had abandoned centuries ago. His shields could easily stop such simple attacks. The first human rounds hit his flagship's shields. The barrier flickered but held. Vex then allowed himself a moment of relief. Then more rounds came, hundreds of them, thousands of them. The human ships had opened fire with everything they had. Every turret was blazing. Every rail gun was sending metal death across space. The rounds were not large, but they were fast, incredibly fast. Vex then watched his shield strength indicator. It was dropping, slowly at first, then faster. "Admiral," his shield officer called out, "the human projectiles are moving at nearly 1% of light speed. Our shields are absorbing massive kinetic energy. We cannot maintain this rate of fire." "Impossible," Kethra said. "No magnetic accelerator can reach those velocities." But the numbers did not lie. The humans had built weapons that should not exist. Their primitive technology had somehow achieved what Dominion engineers said was impossible. The first Dominion shield failed. It was a destroyer on the fleet's left side. The barrier collapsed and the human round struck the hull. The ship had armor, good armor. It should have protected the vessel. The rounds punched through like the armor was not there. Vex then watched in horror as 100 small holes appeared in the destroyer's hull. Atmosphere rushed out. Internal explosions followed as the rounds hit fuel lines and power systems. The ship broke apart in seconds. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Vex then ordered. "Do not let them concentrate fire." The Dominion fleet began to move. The elegant formation broke apart as ships tried to avoid the human weapons, but the humans adjusted. Their fire followed the moving targets. More shields began to fail. A cruiser died next, then another destroyer, then a support ship that had no weapons at all. Vex then could not believe what he was seeing. His fleet was being hurt by primitives with metal slugs. This was not possible. This could not be happening. He called up the tactical data on the human vessels. He needed to understand. How were they surviving? How were their weapons so powerful? The answer made his blood run cold. The human ships were not designed to avoid damage. They were designed to survive it. Their hulls were thick, ridiculously thick, layer after layer of metal and ceramic and composite materials. Their critical systems were buried deep inside the ship, protected by meters of armor. Their power plants had multiple backups. Their life support had emergency reserves. The humans had built their ships to take punishment. They expected to be hit. They planned for it. And their weapons were not meant to be elegant. They were meant to kill. The magnetic accelerators were simple but brutal. They threw metal at velocities that overwhelmed any defense. It did not matter that the Dominion had energy shields. Enough kinetic force would break any barrier. The humans knew this. They had calculated it. They had built their entire fleet around one simple idea: hit hard and keep fighting no matter how much damage you take. Vex then looked at the display again. The human ships were closer now. Some of them were barely holding together. One was venting fire from half its hull. Another had lost its forward section entirely. But they were still fighting, still advancing, still killing his ships. A message appeared on the communications console. His officer looked at it with wide eyes. "Admiral," she said, "we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Audio only." "Play it," Vex then said. The bridge speakers crackled. Then a human voice filled the room. It was calm, almost casual, like the speaker was discussing the weather instead of a battle. "Dominion Fleet, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the UNS Defiant. You have entered human-protected space and opened fire on our vessels. We have taken your first punch. Now it is our turn. You can withdraw now and survive, or you can stay and learn what happens when you threaten our people." The transmission ended. Vex then stood in silence. His bridge crew looked at him, waiting for orders, waiting for their admiral to tell them what to do. He had commanded fleets for 200 years. He had never retreated. He had never lost. But looking at the advancing human ships, burning and broken but still fighting, he felt something he had never felt before in battle. Fear. Admiral Vex then retreated to his private tactical room behind the bridge. He needed to think. He needed to understand. His fleet was dying and he did not know why. The room was quiet. Screens covered the walls, showing data from the battle. He ignored them for a moment and accessed the Dominion historical archives. He searched for everything about humans. What he found made him sit down heavily in his chair. The humans had only been a spacefaring species for 80 years, but they had been a warfighting species for their entire existence. Their homeworld, a planet they called Earth, had been the site of endless conflict. Nation against nation, tribe against tribe, brother against brother. Vex then read about their ancient wars. Millions had died in single battles. They had developed weapons of terrible power just to kill each other. They had split the atom and used it to burn cities. They had created poisons that could kill entire populations. They had built machines whose only purpose was death. And they had kept going. Every time one weapon was created, they built a defense. Every time a defense was created, they built a better weapon. It was an endless cycle of destruction and survival. The Dominion had fought wars for expansion, for resources, for power. When the cost became too high, they negotiated, they made peace, they moved on. The humans fought wars for survival. There was no negotiation when your enemy wanted you dead. There was no peace when losing meant extinction. They fought until one side was completely destroyed. Vex then read about something called the World Wars. In the first one, millions died in muddy trenches, fighting over meters of ground. In the second one, entire cities were burned to ash. The humans had killed 60 million of their own kind in just 6 years. And then they had rebuilt, they had recovered, they had become stronger. He found military records from their space age. The humans had fought among themselves even as they expanded to the stars. Small conflicts, border disputes, resource wars. They never stopped preparing for battle. They never stopped building weapons. Their ships were not pretty because they were not meant to be pretty. They were built by people who expected to fight. Every design choice was about survival and killing power. Nothing else mattered. Vex then pulled up communication intercepts from the current battle. His intelligence officers had decoded some human transmissions. He listened to them. The human captains spoke to each other with calm voices. They discussed damage reports like they were reading shopping lists. One captain reported that half his crew was dead. His ship was falling apart around him. He asked for orders and said he could still fight for another 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Half his crew was dead, and he was thinking about how much longer he could kill enemies before his ship finally died. Another captain reported that her engines were failing. She could not retreat. She asked permission to use her remaining power for one final attack run. She wanted to ram a Dominion cruiser. Permission was granted. Vex then watched the replay of what happened next. The crippled human ship, trailing fire and debris, accelerated toward his fleet. Point defense weapons fired at it. Plasma bolts struck its hull. Pieces fell away. The ship kept coming. At the last moment, escape pods launched from the human vessel, tiny capsules carrying the surviving crew. They ejected just seconds before impact. The human ship hit the Dominion cruiser at full speed. Both vessels vanished in a ball of fire. Vex then stared at the screen. The human captain had sacrificed her ship to take down one of his cruisers. She had saved her crew at the last second, but she had been willing to die. She had calculated the exchange as acceptable. One human destroyer for one Dominion cruiser. The humans saw that as a victory. He accessed more records. He found the human concept of acceptable losses. They built this idea into their military planning. Before any battle, they estimated how many of their own people would die. If the number was low enough compared to the objective, they proceeded. They did not fight to avoid death. They fought to achieve victory, even if death was the price. Vex then thought about his own fleet. His officers were trained to preserve their ships. A damaged vessel was supposed to withdraw and repair. A captain who lost his ship faced disgrace. The Dominion valued every warship because they were expensive and difficult to replace. The humans valued their ships too, but not more than they valued winning. He found records of human tactical doctrine. They had something called defense in depth. It meant letting enemies advance while bleeding them with constant attacks. It meant trading space for time. It meant accepting losses today to achieve victory tomorrow. The humans had planned for this battle. They knew they could not stop the Dominion fleet with 12 ships, so they had decided to hurt it instead. To make every ship they lost cost the enemy more. To fight not for victory today but for survival in the long war. Vex then finally understood. He was not fighting a primitive species. He was fighting a species that had been preparing for war since before his ancestors crawled out of the ocean. The humans did not have better technology. They had better will. They would keep fighting when any sensible species would surrender. They would sacrifice their own lives to hurt their enemies. They would accept any cost if it meant their people survived. He returned to the bridge. The battle had continued while he was gone. 8 more Dominion ships had been destroyed. The human fleet was reduced to 7 vessels, all heavily damaged, but they were still fighting, still advancing. Kethra approached him. Her scales were pale with shock. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I have analyzed the human weapons. Their rail guns are not special technology. The projectiles are simple tungsten rods, but they have optimized everything. The acceleration, the targeting, the rate of fire. They have taken primitive technology and made it deadly through pure engineering focus." Vex then nodded. "They do not build weapons for elegance. They build weapons that work." "What do we do, Admiral?" He looked at the display. His fleet had been reduced from 40 ships to 26. The humans had lost 5 ships. The exchange rate was wrong. The mathematics were clear. If this continued, the humans would lose all their ships, but the Dominion fleet would be crippled. And something told Vex then that this was not the only human fleet. These were defenders. They were buying time. Time for what? He was about to find out. "Admiral," the sensor officer called out, "new contacts, coming out of FTL behind our fleet." Vex then turned to the display. 20 new signatures appeared, human signatures. The humans had reinforcements. They had been waiting. "Where did they come from?" Vex then demanded. "Unknown, Admiral. They were hiding in the radiation shadow of the gas giant. We never detected them." Vex then closed his eyes. The humans had planned this. They had known his fleet was coming. They had positioned ships behind him. They had used the first battle as bait, drawing him in while the second force waited. They had read his tactics. They had studied his patterns. They were not primitives at all. They were predators. And he had walked into their trap. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion erupted into chaos. Officers shouted reports. Alarms blared. The tactical display showed 20 new human ships emerging from behind the gas giant, their weapons already charging. Admiral Vex then stood in the center of the storm, his mind racing. He was caught between 2 forces. The original human fleet was still advancing from the front, damaged but dangerous. The reinforcements were closing from behind. His fleet was trapped. "All ships form defensive sphere," he ordered. "Prepare for engagement on multiple fronts." His fleet tried to reorganize, but the humans did not give them time. The reinforcements opened fire immediately. Railgun rounds streaked across space, slamming into the rear of the Dominion formation. Ships that had been untouched by the first battle suddenly found themselves under attack. A supply vessel exploded, then a light cruiser, then another destroyer. The original human fleet pressed forward at the same moment. Their surviving ships were falling apart. Atmosphere leaked from a dozen holes. Power flickered across damaged systems, but they kept firing. They kept advancing. Vex then watched his tactical display with growing horror. His fleet was being torn apart from both directions. The humans coordinated perfectly. When one force pulled back, the other pushed harder. When Dominion ships turned to face one threat, they exposed themselves to the other. "Admiral," Kethra said, her voice shaking, "we have lost 6 more ships in the last 10 minutes. Shield strength across the fleet is dropping. Several vessels report critical damage." "Order the fleet to concentrate fire on the reinforcements," Vex then said. "They are fresh. If we can break them, we can escape." The Dominion ships turned their weapons toward the new threat. Plasma cannons fired. Missiles launched. For a moment, it seemed like the superior Dominion firepower would turn the tide. Then the humans did something unexpected. 3 ships from the reinforcement fleet broke formation and accelerated directly toward the Dominion line. They were not firing. They were just charging forward at maximum speed. "What are they doing?" Vex then asked. The answer came seconds later. The 3 human ships hit the Dominion formation like battering rams. They crashed into the gaps between ships, disrupting the careful defensive positions. One human vessel actually collided with a Dominion destroyer, both ships crumpling from the impact. It was suicide, but it was tactical suicide. The Dominion formation fell apart. Ships scattered to avoid the human attackers, and as they scattered, the other human ships picked them off one by one. Vex then could not understand this strategy. How could any species throw away ships and live so easily? How could they sacrifice themselves without hesitation? A communication came through. Another human voice, different from Captain Chen. "Dominion Admiral, this is Commodore James Wright of the United Nations Navy. You are surrounded and outmatched. Your fleet has been reduced by half. Ours is still strong. You can continue to fight and lose everything. Or you can withdraw now and tell your masters what happens when you attack human space. Choose quickly. We are not patient people." The transmission ended. Vex then looked around his bridge. His officers stared back at him. Their faces showed fear, confusion, and shame. They had come here expecting an easy victory. They had found something very different. "Admiral," one of his captains said through the communication system, requesting permission to withdraw. "My ship has lost main weapons. Shields are at 12%. I cannot continue fighting." More requests followed. Captain after captain reported severe damage. Ships that had been proud warships were now barely functioning. The Dominion fleet had been cut in half in just 3 hours. Vex then thought about his options. He could order his fleet to fight to the last ship. They might destroy the remaining human vessels. They might even win. But winning here meant nothing if his entire fleet was destroyed. The Dominion had other enemies, other threats. Losing 40 warships to primitives would invite attacks from rival empires. And something else bothered him. The humans had held ships in reserve. They had planned this ambush perfectly. What else were they hiding? How many more ships did they have waiting? He could not risk it. "All ships," Vex then said slowly, each word tasting like poison, "prepare to withdraw. Set course for the nearest Dominion staging point." Relief flooded through the communication channels. His surviving captains acknowledged the order. Damaged ships began turning away from the battle. The humans let them go. They did not pursue. They did not fire on the retreating vessels. They simply held their positions and watched the Dominion fleet limp away. Vex then found this more terrifying than anything else. The humans were not interested in total destruction. They wanted the Dominion to survive. They wanted his ships to carry a message home. "We can hurt you, we can beat you, and we are not afraid." The Eternal Dominion entered faster than light travel. The stars stretched into lines. The battlefield disappeared. Vex then stood alone on his bridge, surrounded by silent officers. He had started the day with 40 warships and absolute confidence. He was ending it with 11 ships and a destroyed career. But worse than that was the knowledge burning in his mind. The humans were not what the Dominion thought they were. They were not primitives to be conquered. They were not savages to be taught their place. They were warriors. They had been warriors longer than the Dominion had existed, and they had just proven that all the Dominion's technology and power meant nothing against a species that refused to surrender. Vex then walked off the bridge without speaking. His officers watched him go. They did not ask where he was going. They did not offer comfort or counsel. There was nothing to say. The Dominion had poked a creature it did not understand, and now that creature was awake. Vex then returned to his private quarters. He sat at his desk and stared at the blank screen. Tomorrow, he would have to file his report. He would have to explain to High Command how he lost 29 ships to a primitive species with metal slugs and thick hulls. They would not believe him, not at first. They would think he was making excuses. They would blame him for incompetence. But eventually they would listen. Eventually they would understand. And by then, it might be too late. 3 weeks had passed since the battle. Admiral Vexthan sat in his quarters at the Dominion Naval Command on the homeworld. His scales had turned gray with stress. He had not slept well since returning from human space. The inquiry had been difficult. High Command had questioned him for days. They had demanded explanations. They had called him a failure. Some had even accused him of cowardice. But Vexthan had shown them the data, the battle recordings, the damage reports, the communication intercepts. Slowly, their anger had turned to concern, and concern had turned to fear. Now he sat alone, writing his final report. His career was finished. He knew this. A commander who loses 3/4 of his fleet does not receive another command, but his report might save others. His words might prevent the Dominion from making the same mistake again. He began to write. To the High Council of the Dominion. This is my official record of the engagement at Human Colony 7. I write this not to excuse my failure, but to warn you of what we face. The humans are not what we believe them to be. They are perhaps the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. Our intelligence was wrong. We looked at their technology and saw primitives. We looked at their short history among the stars and saw children. We did not look at what mattered. The humans have spent their entire existence fighting, not against other species, against each other. For thousands of years, they have waged war on their own world. They have killed millions of their own kind. They have developed weapons of terrible power just to use on themselves. This has made them into something we have never faced before, a species that does not fear war, a species that expects war, a species that has built their entire civilization around surviving conflict. Their ships are not elegant, they are not beautiful. They are machines designed for one purpose, to keep fighting no matter how much damage they take. Every system has backups. Every critical component is buried under layers of armor. They do not build ships to avoid damage. They build ships to survive it. Their weapons are simple but brutal. Metal slugs thrown at impossible speeds. No elegance, no sophistication, just pure killing power. They have taken primitive technology and optimized it for destruction. But worse than their ships and their weapons is their will. The humans do not surrender. They do not retreat. They calculate their losses before battle and decide what price they are willing to pay. Then they pay it, without hesitation, without regret. I watched human captains sacrifice their ships to destroy mine. I watched burning vessels continue to fight with half their crews dead. I watched commanders discuss acceptable losses with voices as calm as if they were ordering food. They are not afraid to die. They are only afraid to lose. This is something we cannot match. The Dominion fights for power and resources. We calculate cost and benefit. When the price becomes too high, we stop. The humans fight for survival. For them, there is no price too high. There is no sacrifice too great. They will keep fighting until they win or until every last one of them is dead. They do not want to conquer us. They do not want to rule the galaxy. They only want to protect their people. But this makes them more dangerous, not less. A species fighting for conquest can be negotiated with. A species fighting for survival cannot. I have studied their history since returning. I have learned about their wars, their strategies, their philosophy. They have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. They have been preparing for war their entire existence, against us, against anyone who threatens them. They have been waiting for this moment, waiting for a species like us to test them. And we failed that test. Those primitive human warships should not have survived the first volley. Our plasma cannons should have burned through their armor in seconds. Our superior technology should have given us an easy victory. But technology is not everything. Will matters, preparation matters, the willingness to sacrifice matters. The humans have all of these things. We have only technology. I recommend the following to High Command. Do not engage humanity in prolonged conflict. They will not break. They will not surrender. They will fight until one side is completely destroyed, and they have proven they can hurt us badly. Do not underestimate them because of their primitive technology. They have optimized everything they have for killing. Their simple weapons are more deadly than our advanced systems because they are designed to work when damaged, to fire when breaking, to kill when dying. Do not expect fear to defeat them. They have lived with fear their entire history. It does not stop them, it makes them stronger. If we must deal with humanity, we should seek peace, real peace, not the submission we demand from other species. The humans will never submit. They will only agree to fair terms. And if we cannot have peace, we should prepare for the worst war in Dominion history. I have commanded fleets for over 200 years. I have never said these words before, but I say them now with complete certainty. I am afraid of the humans. Not because they beat me, but because of how they beat me. They fought with a fury and determination I have never seen. They sacrificed themselves without hesitation. They turned a certain defeat into a victory through sheer will. If they can do this with 12 ships against 40, what will they do with 100 ships? 1,000? What will they do when they have had time to study our technology and improve their own? The humans are young among the stars. They are just beginning. In 100 years, in 200 years, they will be something we cannot imagine. We should make peace with them now, while we still can. This is my final recommendation. This is my warning. This is my record. Admiral Vexthan, 3rd Fleet, retired. He finished writing and stared at the screen. The words looked small, inadequate. They could not capture the terror of watching his ships die. They could not explain the cold feeling that had lived in his chest since that day. But they were all he had. He transmitted the report to High Command. Then he walked to the window of his quarters and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there the humans were waiting. They were building more ships, training more warriors, preparing for the next battle. Vexthan did not know if the Dominion would listen to his warning. He did not know if they would seek peace or choose war. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If the Dominion chose war, they would regret it. The humans had shown him something in that battle, something beyond tactics and weapons and technology. They had shown him the power of a species that refused to accept defeat, a species that would fight to the last ship, the last soldier, the last breath. Those primitive warships should not have survived the first volley. But they did. And that changed everything. Vexthan turned off the light and sat in the darkness, listening to his own breathing, thinking about the species that had ended his career and might one day end his people. The humans were coming. And the galaxy was not ready.